Hi, and welcome to our recording on the Orange Revolution, the Ukrainian political revolution of the first decade of the 21st century. I'm David Baum. I'm a course mentor in Gen Ed Social Sciences, and for the next 7 or 8 minutes, I'm going to guide you through this event. The Orange Revolution was the result of growing impatience with the ongoing corruption and cronyism of the Ukraine's post-Soviet regime, headed by Leonid Kuchma. The problems in the Ukraine mirrored those experienced by other post-communist nations in the 1990s and early 2000s, including Balkan and Eastern European nations and former Soviet republics. Ukrainians had high hopes for the post-Soviet era. Their population was well educated, the Ukraine itself had considerable natural resources, and the willingness of the Ukrainians to cooperate in dismantling its nuclear armaments won it praise and support in the West. It was thus especially frustrating that the Ukrainians, instead of following the trajectory of some of the more advanced post-Soviet societies like the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland, found themselves instead more readily compared to the so-called Stans, the Central Asian former Soviet republic, whose former communist leaders had changed political labels, but still retained iron-fisted anti-democratic rule. Opposition to the status quo first built in 2000, when a leading Ukrainian investigative journalist was kidnapped and murdered. Suspicion fell on the Ukrainian president, Leonid Kuchma, who was implicated in the affair by a cassette recording of him supposedly ordering a hit on the journalist. Considerable confusion resulted, with calls for Kuchma's resignation and the organization of the first formal opposition group, the UBK, the Ukraine Without Kuchma. Kuchma further complicated matters by appearing to have lent secret military aid to Saddam Hussein in advance of the US-led invasion of March 2003. So, in addition to provoking domestic political instability within the Ukraine, Kuchma also succeeded in precipitating an international crisis and a significant realignment of Eastern European diplomacy. The US and Great Britain cooled towards the Ukraine after a decade of active support, and the Ukraine turned toward Russia, a move with considerable importance to domestic politics. Kuchma's political standing ahead of scheduled elections was wobbly to say the least, and only the constitutional prohibition against him succeeding himself saved him the embarrassment of a direct defeat at the polls. He put forward in his place his Prime Minister, Viktor Yanukovych. With the jury still out, as it were, on Kuchmagate, as the whole affair came to be called, and the international diplomatic scene in a very delicate place, Kuchma had, in the meantime, sent a Ukrainian contingent to Iraq in 2003 to restore relations with the US and Great Britain. But this only had the effect of irritating Russia without greatly softening relations with the West, thus further complicating issues. So it was crucial for Kuchma to have an ally in his successor. So crucial, in fact, that Kuchma was prepared to steal the election if necessary, and as it turned out, it was. The first round of the 2004 presidential elections finished with a virtual tie between Yanukovych and his main opposition, Viktor Yushchenko, who is the leader of a party called the Our Ukraine Party, but it soon came to be known simply by its party color as the Orange Party. Since neither candidate had reached 50% of the first round balloting, a second round was scheduled for November of 2004. Already, voting irregularities had been noted in the earlier round, and during the campaign, opposition supporters had been arrested, and Yushchenko himself the victim of a nearly fatal and quite mysterious dioxide poisoning. In the second round, the electoral abuses were rampant. Yushchenko represented for many Ukrainians the European aspects of Ukrainian society. He was polished in his appearance, progressive in his politics, and appealed widely to Ukrainian youth who were looking for a distinctly non-Soviet candidate. Yanukovych, by comparison, seemed the candidate of the past and found his support largely in the ethnically Russian eastern sections of the country. Thus, the election was decided along ethnic, regional, and generational lines. Exit polling showed Yushchenko the clear winner, but official results gave Yanukovych a narrow victory. The results were disputed in both the streets and rejected in the world's capitals. Overall, the runoff election and its aftermath nearly broke the Ukrainian state. Yanukovych supporters threatened to secede from the nation if the election results were overturned, and the parliament, local jurisdictions, and the Ukrainian Supreme Court all weighed in, with the last, the Supreme Court, finally invalidating the election and ordering a new vote. Civil war seemed a distinct possibility. It is useful here, I think, to stop and ask why the Ukraine had not in fact already imploded at this point. In part, the answer seems to lie with the military's detachment from the crisis. As in a number of other Eastern European crises, including the formal collapse of the Soviet Union, the military and the security and intelligence forces and agencies sat on the sidelines. The famous picture here of Boris Yeltsin atop a tank in Moscow during an aborted military coup could stand for a number of key moments during the political crises that rocked Eastern Europe in the 1990s and early 21st century. The Orange Revolution would follow this model. The Ukrainian military and intelligence forces were committed to de-escalating potential violence and defusing the political crisis through political means. In the new election, Yushchenko won a decisive victory. He was aided by vigilant monitoring of the vote, which helped reduce electoral fraud, and by the involvement of outside pro-democracy groups from neighboring countries like Georgia, from Western Europe, and perhaps most effectively from the United States. At the time, Yushchenko's victory was hailed as a triumph of Western democratic ideals in a nation struggling to free itself from its undemocratic Soviet past. Subsequent events have recast this view, and the Orange Revolution may yet go the way of the Arab Spring as a missed opportunity. Ukrainians eventually rejected Yushchenko and his reforms, including his tilt towards the West, his opposition to Russia, and his run-ins with Yulia Tymoshenko, his one-time ally. In 2010, Yushchenko suffered a humiliating, crushing defeat and was succeeded by Yanukovych. Tymoshenko, until her arrest, became the leader of the opposition, that is, the Orange Party. It's hard to see at this point that the Orange Revolution has succeeded. It was able to address momentarily the tremendous cultural crisis engendered by Kuchma's corruption and the undermining of Ukraine's legitimate electoral processes. It also revealed the willingness of the military and the intelligence forces to defer, for now, to political processes in resolving the Ukraine's problems. But the continued involvement of Ukraine's top leaders in questionable dealings and the willingness of entrenched political leaders to use the judiciary to silence opponents are reminders that the original aspirations of the Oranges have not been met. Thank you for listening.